We turn now to number 6 in our series, looking at 1st and 2nd Corinthians. This one's entitled Spiritual Gifts, and indeed there in chapters 12, 13 and 14 we have a lot of material about spiritual gifts. Let's turn to chapter 12 where he says about spiritual gifts in quotes. And the reason I've put it in quotes in the Free Bible version is because he's responding to their letter, and now he's picking up their subject that they've been asking him about. So now I turn to that. And this is important for what we'll see in a little while. And he says that there are many different kinds of spiritual gifts, verse 4, but they come from the same Spirit. There are different kinds of ministries, but they come from the same Lord. There are different ways of working, but they come from the same God who is at work in all of them. And then one person is given by the Spirit the ability to do this and to do that. And you have even examples of what those are. The ability to perform miracles, the gift of spiritual discernment, one I think that's very important. The ability to speak different languages, the ability to interpret languages, but all these gifts are the work of the one and same Spirit, sharing with each person as he alone chooses. And then he gives the example there on chapter 12, verse 12 and on, of the human body made up of different parts, and it's all important parts. And he says it doesn't matter whether we are Jews or Greeks, slave or free, we were all given the one Spirit to drink. The body is not made of one part, but many parts. If the foot were to say, because I'm not a hand, I'm not part of the body, would that make it not part of the body? If the ear were to say, because I'm not an eye, I'm not part of the body, and so on. He's really comparing these different aspects of the body, the different functions of the body, and saying they are all absolutely necessary. And in verse 18, he says, God has arranged each part in the body, every last one of them, placing them just as he wanted. And then he asks if they were all the same part, what would happen to the body? And you can imagine, if we were all hands or all feet or all heads or all arms, it would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? And he also says, the eye can't tell the hand, I don't need you, or the head tell the feet, I don't need you. And this is his way of trying to get people to understand what's really going on in terms of spiritual gifts. And then as we move over into chapter 13, he really comes to grips with it in terms of the wonderful love chapter, because at the end of chapter 12 he says, I'm going to show you a much, much better way. He's going to show you a far better way, he says in the Free Bible version. And he goes on to say, if I was able to do all these things but had not love, I would only be an echoing gong or a clashing cymbal. Sometimes we put such an emphasis on spiritual gifts that we forget that the fundamental principle is that of love. Now, we need to turn to chapter 14. He goes on talking about spiritual gifts and tongues and so on. But I want to drop down to verse 34 because there's a lot of misunderstanding here in what's going on. In verse 34, he says, women should stay quiet in churches. They shouldn't speak. They should respect their situations as the law states. If they want to learn, they can do so at home, asking their husbands. It is not proper for women to speak in church. And a lot of people got upset with Paul because of that. But notice what it says in verse 36. He says, what? Did the word of God begin with you? Are you the only ones it came to? He then is starting to react to these lines. So in the Free Bible version, I've put verses 34 and 35 in quote marks, because he's again quoting them. This is not what he believes. This is what they are writing in the letter to him. And that's why there's such a break between verse 35 and 36 when he goes, what? Did the word of God begin with you? And it's very interesting as you look back in some of our early leaders. There's a very good comment in the Signs of the Times, July 18, 1906, by M.C. Wilcox. He quotes 1 Corinthians 14:34, and then he says, "Then as words of objectors, let your women keep silence in churches, for it's not permitted them to speak, for it is a shame for women to speak in the church. Here is the apostles' rebuke to them. What? Was it from you that the word of God went forth, or came it unto you alone?" That from M.C. Wilcox is a great example of good biblical interpretation. He's actually writing this out and explaining that, no, this isn't what Paul believes. He's responding to these objectors, or these people who are writing into Paul to ask questions. So as we think of spiritual gifts, let's not get distracted by some of these things that people say, headship theology and all the rest. Let's concentrate on what God is wanting for all of us, irrespective of gender.